Shalom, everyone, and welcome again to my little channel here. So I've had a few questions recently about what I think was the Abbasids' agenda. Why did they change the religion? In my opinion, you see, I think that we can't say much about the Umayyad religion. I know that Islam hates the Umayyads and hates everything they stand for, and the Abbasids got rid of everything we might have been able to know about them. Everything was eliminated, and the only things that we have are things concerning the 7th century and basically the Umayyad period. Are things sources I'm talking about from sources or other artifacts are things from non-Islamic sources, um, or just the coins and the Quranic materials themselves, like the Birmingham manuscript. And there's no context, very little context that we have. We have also got, as you know, the Jewish history. And I always thought to myself that since the Abbasids hated Jews so much, and that they hated the Umayyads so much, that it's worthwhile investigating whether the Umayyads were Messianic Hebrews. That was something which I thought. And so I thought it was worthwhile to explore the artifacts we have concerning the 7th century um, um, origins of the Umayyad religion, and compare that with what we've got in Jewish sources to see if there's something which can be established here. What are we looking at? Some kind of Messianic Hebrew group which used to exist at that time and was suppressed out of existence. Now, of course, you know, I come from a Sabbatean background, and that is exactly what we would say. But of course, so I'm biased, and I have a bias there. But it's worthwhile investigating, right? I mean, if your tradition is saying that this is what the case is, isn't it worthwhile to sit down and say, how much of this is really true? Let's go and investigate that. Is it really? Is it the truth? So, taking a critical sort of approach, looking into it, I found that yes, it looks like it might be actually true. There might be some basis to this, right? So that's where I came from on this matter. And so yes, I think there's a general good argument here that perhaps what we perceive to be Islam, only because that's the way it's presented to us from Abbasid sources and the legacy of the Abbasids, or the hegemony which has been given us through Islam from the Abbasids, and everything which has passed through Abbasid hands, it makes us think that this is something to do with Islam. But if you take away all of that, can we look at it from a different perspective and see something different? Is there something different? Does it actually fit into sort of Messianic Hebrew approach to things? And yes, I think I've made a good example, a good argument so far about why I think that could be the case. Of course, we have to reinterpret the Quranic materials and see them through monophysite sort of eyes, because monophysite Christology is also Messianic Hebrew Christology. If you want to believe Jesus, I've said this before, if you want to believe Jesus as the Messiah, then in Judaism, then you've only got one option. You have to view him as a sort of angelic emanation. Otherwise, you've got no choice, because the Messiah in Judaism is the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God which was hovering over the waters at the beginning of creation. That is very standard in Judaism. We know that that is the Spirit of the Messiah. So the only option for you is to regard Jesus, Son of Mary, as the Spirit of Messiah. That is Ruach Elohim. If you don't look at it that way, then you've got no way to see Jesus as the Messiah in Judaism, because if you want to see him as a human Messiah in Judaism, then you have to have him confirmed by the Sanhedrin and the Jewish authorities, which he wasn't confirmed by. Therefore, you don't have him as the Messiah, but as a potential Messiah, if you believe that this human is going to come back to life in the future, and because I'm talking about from the Judaic perspective, the person is dead and it has to come back to life in the future and fulfill the role of the Messiah. So until that happens, you can't regard him as the Messiah, but only as a potential Messiah in Judaism. So the only way you can actually view him as the Messiah in Judaism is to say, well, he looked like a human being. He was born from Mary and lived life on earth as a human being, but in fact he was actually Ruach Elohim in human form, and he did everything that looked like a human, but he's actually actually was Ruach Elohim. That is, therefore, the messianic spirit, and therefore he's the Messiah. So this is a very good argument in Judaism, within the rules of Judaism, for why he's the Jewish Messiah. Of course, you're going to get people calling you crazy, because they're going to say, well, look, he wasn't he wasn't he looked like a normal human being. Why are you saying that this is some kind of divine emanation or angelic messenger? Why are you saying that? You must be crazy. Okay, so you can get calling you crazy, but when it comes down to the halacha, that's the Jewish law, then there's no ruling against this. There's nothing you can find to say that you can't believe this human being is in fact Ruach Elohim. So if you, as long as you're not saying, actually, this human being became Ruach Elohim, or this human being was a completely normal human being from Mary's flesh, and he suddenly became Ruach Elohim, then you're not in trouble. As long as you're saying, well, actually, he only looked like a human being born of Mary, but in fact, from the very point of when he was in the womb, this was actually Ruach Elohim appearing in the womb like that, and was born to appear like a human being. So you have your argument here. Just saying shalom to a couple of people. Barak P, shalom, hello, God bless you. And Spada del Senor, shalom, God bless you. Thank you for coming along. So I've explained the messianic sort of principle of how you can have Jesus as the Messiah, and why, from a Jewish perspective, only the monophysite view works from the point of view of Judaism. So we have this monophysite way, which we've got various scholars like Peter von Sivers, Christoph Luxemburg, and Gunther Lulling, who have all, and many others, who have all seen, oh yes, when they studied for a long time, yes, it's clear the Christology in the Quran is monophysite, that fits very well. So, and in fact, there's plenty of other things in the Quran which show that they've been taken from monophysite churches. By the way, just to remind you that those Oriental Orthodox churches, which used to be monophysite in the 1970s, declared themselves to be now miaphysite, and have rejected the monophysite label. So let's just remember that official church doesn't really have that position anymore. And let's also just remember that the Oriental Orthodox Church was coming together as a communion in the 7th century. Before then, it wasn't. It started to come together as a communion in the 7th century in competition with what the Umayyads were doing. So there was some kind of competition going on, a competition to sort of gather up the monophysite believers. And while one side was, as obviously I'm saying, Messianic Hebrew, the other side was an official church which was trying to gather them in. So there was they emerged at the same time. The Umayyad religion and the monophysite, the Umayyad religion and the Oriental Orthodox Church emerged at the same time. So anyway, so the argument is that there was a Umayyad religion. It had a monophysite view of Jesus Christ, and it was a Messianic Hebrew movement. So what did the Abbasids do? Why did they change all this? Why couldn't they just keep up with that? What was going on? Why did they change? That was the argument. A lot of people have been asking me, why would they make such a big change? And so I think that Shalom Fisanti and Shalom Silver LTC, thank you for coming along. Shalom Matityahu. So I think that although now the Abbasids, I think, came from basically, I think they were Persian pagan. I think they were Quraysh, and I think they they may have intended to imply descent from the Achaemenid Messiah Quraysh, Cyrus the Great. Quraysh, his name is Quraysh in Hebrew. And so I think that there may be some kind of intended sort of hinting at descent from the Achaemenids with the name Quraysh. And I think that this family, these Persian pagans, had been placed in charge of the Hijaz at a time when the Persian Empire had conquered that land. And I think that there were several times that the Persian Empire did that. Even though you won't see it always on historical atlases. but it seems to me pretty straightforward that if they've conquered Yemen, then they probably have gone across the Arabia at the same time and taken all of the Hijaz too. So I think there was a time when the Persians conquered Arabia, and they put this Quraysh uh, family in charge, Persian pagans in charge, who then, of course, over the hundreds of years, Arabized, and that's what I think that they were. But there were more than one. For example, the Sassanians themselves believe that they descended from the Achaemenids, and there's also a Parthian royal family of the house of Ispah. Was it Ispahbad or Ispahbadun or Budan? Ispah-Budan, they also regarded themselves as descendants of the Achaemenids. So it's not unheard of that there were plenty of families, Parthians and Persians. That's the Pahlavis and the Parsiks. They were actually originally different groups. They spoke slightly different languages. If you like the differences between Kurdish and Iranian, if you like. So they were groups of Parthians who descended from or claimed descent from Achaemenids. The Sassanians claimed descent from Achaemenids, and I think that these Quraysh also were hinting at that same idea as well, that they had been placed in charge of the Hijaz, and they managed to survive there for a long time. And hence they promoted the idea that their religion began in that area. Now, I think so. So when the Abbasids gradually rose to power, and I've said before with regards to the Qiblas that the reason why I think all the Qiblas were originally facing towards the Holy Land is because they were all synagogues. And then there's a time where the Qiblas are facing all over the place, and that's because I believe that they are getting converted to messianic ideas, where it says in the Quran, we've seen you turning your face to the heavens, and so now we'll point to your Qibla that you'll turn your face wherever you be to the Masjid al-Haram. And I've said that this case al-Haram refers to not to the Temple Mount, because we're talking about messianics who don't consider this anything special. But al-Haram refers specifically to Jesus here, specifically to Muhammadim, that aspect of Jesus which is in the Eucharist and cannot be violated because it's actually a verb. It's an action which you can't actually touch. So that's Hitvi. I've talked about that before. So the Masjid al-Haram, I've argued, basically means wherever you hold your Hitviyatut ceremonies for Motzei Shabbat. So that means anywhere. So then you've got this period where all these Qiblas are facing any direction. It doesn't matter. And since that's the case, you can face anywhere you like. The Abbasid, or the forerunners of the Abbasids, I think they were called Cassanites, were allowed. Nobody's going to stop them from facing their masjids towards their homeland in the Hijaz. See, so, but gradually they actually rose to power and prominence, and they eventually kicked out the Umayyads and took control and established themselves on the throne. And so once they had done that, they started. Well, they had basically to work with what they had. So although I think the Abbasids were Persian pagans originally, I think that the religion that the Abbasids came up with was in the end quite Manichaean, because the Abbasid religion managed to divorce itself completely from the Bible by inventing the doctrine of tahrif, which is the idea that the Bible has been abrogated, the idea of abrogation. And this doctrine of tahrif is completely absent from the Islamic Quran, which the Abbasids, I think, really tried very hard to undermine by creating the idea that, the original Quran was lost, or that Uthman burnt all the originals, and all we've got left is this version by Uthman. And I don't think they were sympathetic in what they allowed the stories of Uthman to come through. So they were trying very hard to undermine it. If you look at the Islamic history, it's quite clear that it's really the Abbasid story is undermining the veracity of the Quran. And I guess that the Quranic materials were just too popular for the Abbasids to be able to get rid of. So their only option was to change the meanings of the Quranic materials through interpretation. So as I said before, my channel joins Luxembourg and von Sievers and Günter Lulling in trying to reverse that process of what the Abbasids did to change the interpretation to suit their needs. What I'm doing is trying to reverse that process of interpretation to find out what it actually said through textual analysis, which is not just mine. I mean, you could argue that I have a bias in this because I'm coming from a Messianic Hebrew point of view. But Luxemburg, von Sievers, and Gunter Lung are not Messianic Hebrews. They have no interest in supporting or promoting Sabbatean ideas. And so it just so happens that I happen to be on the right side with regards to this, that is what the academics are saying. It really does go in that direction. So I'm joining with them in trying to reverse that process of making it look like it's not a monophysite Christology, and reverse that and say, well, what would it actually mean if it was? What is the story of the Quran then if we reverse that Abbasid sort of twisting of the meaning of the Quran? We reverse that. What does it actually say then? But okay, it's monophysite, but that's everybody agrees on that. But what we also need to do is to try and find out what kind of monophysite was it. And so I presented the idea that it was possibly from this Sadducean idea of this Omar Muhammad type person who gets converted to a monophysite belief in Jesus, probably from these monophysite bishops and people he met, like Benjamin and Abraham the First and John of the Cedar, and of course Gabriel, who I mentioned in my videos as well. So the idea is that he converted to this belief, and everybody's quite happy with his belief in Jesus. But that this becomes a movement amongst the Sadducees, and you start to get a messianic movements amongst Sadducees. So you have this Messianic Hebrew group starts to include these Sadducees, and that the Quran or the Quranic materials are specifically designed for those Sadducee Ishmaelites. So I think that the Abbasids, if the Abbasids had a choice, I think they would have preferred to get rid of the Quranic materials altogether. I think that's pretty clear. If they had a choice, but they somehow they couldn't. It was too popular, so they had to work with what they've got. So I said that I think that these people were working with those ideas, and I think that everyone knew that the Umayyads had a connection to this Omar Muhammad character, possibly through the person recorded in Abbasid stories called Ruqayya. And I think that the Abbasids responded to this by inventing the idea that they were also Ishmaelites. I don't think the Sadducees were, but they invented the idea that they were also Ishmaelites and that they were also Hashemites, and that Muhammad was actually part of their own family. And obviously, I don't believe there's any truth to any of these sort of self-aggrandizing claims that the Abbasids come up with. They're just trying to like steal the limelight. It's like this person who you would like imagine you've got like a narcissist you invite to a wedding, and the wedding's going on. That's about the bride and the groom, and the narcissist tries to steal all the attention. Become the center of attention, steal the limelight, and make themselves center of everything. But it's like, who is this person? Even worse than that, it's almost like a gate crasher who just crashes in and then starts to try and make himself, and picks up the microphone and does a speech. Like if you've seen is it called The Wedding Crashers? Something like that. So it's that's sort of like the Abbasid sort of thing. They really try and put themselves in center stage and make everything about them and related to them as well. So I think they were simply pagans appointed by the Sassanids as rulers of the Hijaz, probably in the 500s. And that they managed to get a position of power in the mid 700s, and decided to work with the religious materials that they had at hand, which they couldn't escape from. But they worked with them in order to create a religion which would serve their purposes and was more appealing to them, and that's what we call Ishmaelism. Now, I think that I'm not making any kind of special friendly sort of claims to say, Shiites have got it more right or Sunnis have got it more right. I'm not making any claims to either one. I think Sunnis and Shiites all come from the same Abbasid religion. Okay, that's my position on that. With the exception possibly of the Kurdish Alevis, who I have read books by them claiming that they actually don't descend from Muslims, but that they descend, actually they claim that they descend from Paulician Christians, and that they just managed to survive and keep their ideas alive with using a code, but actually that they claim to be Paulician Christians. So with the exception of the Turkish stroke Kurdish Alevis, which are also in Azerbaijan as well, with the exception of them, I think all the other Shiites and Sunni groups are all essentially from Ishmaelism, and that this was the proto-Abbasid sort of religion that they started to promote on their rise to power when they were trying to gather support for their cause. And of course, the Abbasids, once they came into power, they changed and became they declared themselves to be Sunnis apparently. But I don't think there was much difference between the two religions at that point. I don't think there is anything really significantly different. What we do know is that they arrested um, Abu Hanifa, Numan ibn Thabit, and they threw him in prison. So perhaps if you want to get a better idea of what the Umayyads believe, we should probably study him, except that we don't have anything. There is just nothing at all whatsoever from the Umayyad times, except artifacts and non-Islamic sources that can tell us anything about what the Umayyads believed. Everything else has passed through Abbasid hands. And at the moment it passes through Abbasid hands, we cannot trust it anymore. We just can't trust it. It's affected by the exact people we want to get away from. So Islam is an Abbasid religion. It doesn't matter whether it's Shiite or whether it's Sunni. It's an Abbasid religion. It's an Abbasid invention. It was invented with those ideas, and they all include whatever the sect you are. They all include the same ideas from these Abbasids. So my interest is not in Islam. It's never been an interest in Islam. But I do know that the Abbasids hated Jews. The Abbasids hated Umayyads, and so the conclusion in my mind was, oh, maybe Umayyads and Jews are the same. So let's have a look and see if we can reconstruct the religion of the Umayyads and where it was coming from, and see if that was actually kind of Messianic Hebrew movement, which is what I'm doing. So I hope I managed to explain the idea on that, and that's clear. So now I shall go to your comments and see if I can answer any of your questions here. I've got quite a few here. Greetings to everybody. So Fisanti's got the first question there. Fisanti asks, what do you mean Quraysh? Is it the same Quraysh as the Quran tafsir? No. When I don't believe. I don't. Well, first of all, when we say Quran, I'm talking about Quranic materials, so we mustn't consider the Quran and its tafsir as anything to do with the Quranic materials. I want to keep a very clear division in our minds between the two things. There is a Umayyad religion, and it has its Quranic materials, and then there's the Abbasid religion and its Quran tafsir. So if we're trying to be more historical, we have to keep this kind of split going down our brains and split these two things apart. And then in the standard Islamic narrative, which is the Abbasid narrative, everything you know about Islam and everything you know about the Quraysh is from the Abbasids. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Quraysh. It's basically the Abbasids' own family. The Abbasids are giving this the history. They're telling us what's happened, and they're telling us about their tribe. They're calling it the Quraysh, and they're talking about their location in Hijaz and everything like that. That's all from the Abbasids. That's who they were. And they just try to bring into their story, to their context, they try to bring these other things from the Umayyad times into their context and say, oh yeah, we're part of that movement too. They're trying to bring that in. So that's, I hope I managed to explain that to you, Fisanti. This is more greetings to everybody. And Fisanti confirms there that Persians took Yemen around 555, 75. So it's obvious that they would have also been in the Hijaz at that time too, and possibly appointed their people there. Now, even if they didn't appoint the Abbasids in control of Hijaz at that time, even if they just put this is the Abbasid ancestors, the Quraysh tribe, even if they did only put the Quraysh in Yemen at that time, then they could have migrated north from Yemen, which is also part of the Abbasid narrative. They talk about all these various tribes migrating north from Yemen. Okay. So Spada del Signore says that Bukhari is an Abbasid book, and that absolutely is. That's the key point. I mean, everything we have, which is from the standard Islamic narrative, everything has been through Abbasid hands. It's all Abbasid. So we don't have anything which is pre-Abbasid except non-Islamic sources and the artifacts themselves, coins and inscriptions and the Dome of the Rock and for example, these Quranic materials like the Birmingham manuscript. Yakov Matityahu said, Arab Empire started thanks to the Persian-Arabic War of Dhikar in 610 AD. Yes, I think that the Persian, not the Arabic War. Sorry, no, Yakov, you got two things mixed up there. And I said yes, no. Sorry, I have to correct myself. The Arab Empire started thanks to the Persian-Arabic Civil War of Dhikar. Yes. Was it in 610? No. There's a big discrepancy in the dates with Dhikar, and every individual sort of scholar has got their own opinion on this. So I don't think it's possible to identify exactly when Dhikar happened. I don't think it's possible to identify when it happened. Not 610. But what is likely, based on the fact that we only acknowledge this Battle of Dhikar because of these following facts. Number one, the Arabs did gain independence from the Persians. That's a fact. So there must have been some revolution. Number two, we have this year of the Arabs starting around in the 620s, around 620, 622, something like that. And that is a fact too, from the 7th century. We know these two facts. Number three, we have this Tang Chinese source, which is from the year 651 originally. It's recording events in the year 651, telling us that that the origin of their state, their independent state, had something to do with this lion man, who I'm calling a nobleman, giving an armory to a camel herder, which I'm calling a rich man. So a nobleman gave a rich man an armory, and that's where the independence began. So with these three facts, we can say, yes, okay, Tabari seems to be corroborated. Tabari talks about the Battle of Dhikar. When the Arabs gained independence, it's placed in the Islamic sources also around the year 622. It's actually placed in the year 624, which is not too far off from the start of the year of the Arabs. So that's a good corroboration there too. And number three, he mentions that the sort of run-up to this battle had something to do with a rich man called Hani ibn Qabisa inheriting an armory from a nobleman called Numan al-Munzir, ibn al-Munzir. So he was the Lakhmid king. He left his armory to Hani, and Hani then used that with his troops at the Battle of Dhikar. Hani was replaced very quickly with Hanzala, and they defeated the Persians at this battle. On the Persian side was somebody called Iyas ibn Qabisa. So those are the facts we have. Those are the facts we have. This is the corroboration we have. And what I'm saying happened in 610 is that the Persians decided to go to war against the Byzantines. That's what happened in 610. So that was before the Arabs were free from the Persian rule in 610. That was before then. But the Battle of Dhikar is when the Arab Empire started, thanks to the Persian-Arabic War of Dhikar. Yes, that's right, Yakov. And yes, Silver's saying like and subscribe. So please, do like and subscribe and hit that notification bell as well. I always forget to ask myself, and Silver is the only guy who kind of reminds me to do that. Thank you so much, Silver. If it wasn't for you, I don't think I'd have any subscribers. So yes, please do like and subscribe. What else do we have? Fisanti says, yesterday I read that Al-Munzir the third is considered a king of the Arabs. And then it says the line of Muhammad. Oh, in the line of Muhammad. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it's kind of legitimate, isn't it? Because if Munzir's son was Numan, and Numan left the armory and basically left everything to Hani, and then Hani was succeeded by Hanzala, and Hanzala was succeeded by somebody else, another Abu Bakr, until this Omar Muhammad comes along. Then it's the same line, isn't it? It's the same lineage. Even if the Persians, it's not the genetic lineage, but it's the same sort of a lineage of legitimacy, which comes from the Lakhmid kings, going down that way, passing to the Bakr tribe, and then eventually to Omar and his successors. So there's a kind of legitimacy there, isn't there? So that's another thing which is echoed then. So Yaakov says, in the same year, 610, is very significant because Muhammad received revelation, but the reality is that the Arabs won the first war in 610. No, I don't think that that's so. So yes, there is this legend of 610 being the year that Muhammad received revelation, but that is not the year that the Arabs won the first war. No, that is the year that this moon, what we call the occultation of Mars from behind the crescent moon happened. And that's probably where this story of the splitting of the moon comes from. That could be the origin of the revelations. So, but this was taken, and the hour drew near, it says, and this was taken by the Sassanians as a good omen, time to go to war, and they went in and they invaded the Arabs. But not the Arabs, they invaded the Byzantines. But at this time, the Arabs were very much a part. They were very much part of the Lakhmids, very much part of the Persian Empire when this happened. So they went and they defeated the Romans. The Romans are defeated. So again, another revelation. So the moon split, the hour drew near, the Romans are defeated in the lowest part of the land, which is the Jordan Valley. So you see these revelations are actually poems of some events which happened while the Arabs were part of the Persian Empire. You see, okay, so that's what those are about. Okay, so Silver LTC and then Yaakov saying hello again, more hellos to everybody. Thank you for subscribing, Nathaniel. That's very kind of you. Nathaniel says he subscribed. Fisanti, again, question for Joe. What role do you think the kingdom of Himyar played in the origin of the kingdom of the Arabs? So I think that the kingdom of Himyar is responsible for that. I mean, you know that this was a Jewish kingdom, right? So where did all those Jews go? Did anybody ever think about that? You got a whole Jewish kingdom. Now, according to Jewish law, you've got two kinds of people. You've got the teachers of Judaism, who are the ones who observe the 613 laws of the Torah, and then you've got these sort of levels of it's kind of like I've mentioned it on my introductory video. It's like Judaism is an entire sort of what can you say? Like it's an entire sort of civil system, if you like. It's a system for civil society. It starts with going top to bottom. You've got various sort of hierarchies happening amongst the teachers of Judaism, but that's all basically what we would consider these days as like a ministry. So like the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education. These are the ministers. They're all at the top. And then coming down from the ministers, you've got then, I suppose, you've got your interns, you've got your assistants, you've got your civil servants, which are coming down. These are coming down in the system, civil servants. And then all of these are sort of representing the government. And then the crossover between civil servant and citizen, you have common citizens who are not civil servants, but they have the right to vote and everything like that. They have right to social welfare in Judaism. These are called the Toshavim, and these are the Hebrews. So that's coming down there, and they would be considered the believers, the ones who acknowledge the authority of the Jewish teachers. That would be the believers. So that's part of the civil society. And then outside of that, you've got foreign nations who make peace with and have peaceful relations or diplomatic relations with the Jewish state, and those would be what we call the Gerim. They are not Toshavim, but they're Gerim. So those are the Muslimai, the ones who send their sort of tributes, the gifts to the Jewish state. So those are the Muslims, if you like. So you've got that's the sort of a hierarchy described in Judaism. Judaism is an entire civil system, an entire system of government described in detail from this sort of levels going from the top to foreign relations or international relations. That's how it all goes. And those nations which don't establish diplomatic relations with you and don't have a sort of a tributary sort of arrangement, I suppose, or some kind of peaceful arrangement, those ones are called the Nachrim, which are what we translate as Gentiles, pagans, non-believers who have no place in the world to come. They don't have a place in the hereafter. That's the Jewish system. So it's an entire religious state. There's no concept in Judaism of a divorce or separation of church and state. The church is the state. The church is the state. So it covers all of these things. That's Judaism. That's the way it is. And the word for church in Hebrew, so you know, is Edah. Okay, the word is Edah. So you've got this whole hierarchical system. going from the top ministers, government ministers, down through to international foreign relations and diplomatic relations with foreign nations, and even those nations that don't have friendly relations. So we're talking about Himyar. Himyar, as a Jewish nation, Jewish state, would have had this entire system in place. It would have had the entire system would have been in place. So then you have to ask, what happened to all of these believers, the Toshavim, the Gerim? What happened to them all? The civil servants, the teachers. What happened? There must have been millions of them. Where did they go? And the answer is, well, they were scattered around, but they came and rose back again, essentially as the origins, the Arabic state. The Arabic Jews, because of course Himyars these are the Yemeni Jews, they're Arabic Jews. These Arabian Jews came back in the rise of the Arab state in the 7th century. So that's the answer to your question there, Fisanti. I hope that that makes something clear there. So okay, Yaakov Matityahu says, in the year 610 and 622, the year 610 and 622 are very significant in Islam. Something very significant must have happened in these 2 years. Yes, well, 610 is the year that the moon appeared to split to the common people who were not educated in astrology or astronomy, I should say, or both, in fact, in those days. Not much difference between the two in those days. So that was the time when the Sassanians decided to go to war, I explained. In 622, I think that's the Battle of the Kar, the independence of the Arabs, when the Arabs gained their independence from the Persians. Fisanti says, second question for Joe. You always say that the Quran is a monophysite text. Could some of the doctrine have come from Ethiopia? Well, certainly. I mean, Ethiopians were also monophysites at that time. So, and I think I mentioned earlier in this video, just to remind you all, if you're only listening at this point, those monophysite churches, the Oriental Orthodox, only sort of abandoned monophysitism in the 1970s when their pope, because they have their own pope, based in Egypt, made a sort of a pact with the Roman Catholic Pope, and they abandoned their monophysitism at that time and basically adopted kind of a diaphysite belief, which they call miaphysitism. But until then, they were monophysite. So could some of it come from Ethiopia? Yes, I think that what we're talking about is really that there were monophysite Christians, Messianic Hebrews, whatever you want to call them, and they were sharing ideas, anything which fitted with their views, whether it was from Ethiopia or from Armenia. For example, the angels Harut and Marut are Armenian, and or whether it was from the Syriac sources, Syriac or Orthodox Church, which are for example, the sleepers of Ephesus, which is in the Quran, or various other things. They were mixing around and bringing together ideas which suited monophysite beliefs. So they had their own sort of almost monophysite, almost like a Mishnah, which was starting to develop, and they were sharing it amongst themselves in much a very organic way. They shared doctrine in common. They probably had fellowship with each other. They had their communion together. I think that they weren't keen on priestly hierarchies, and I think they didn't have bishops. I think they were what we call asathali, or akathali, which means without bishops. They were just sort of they had their own ministers, and those ministers were called nabi, were called prophets. So if there was one of them who had a sort of people thought that the Holy Spirit was speaking through them, they would invite that person to stand up in their fellowship congregations and speak the Spirit to them. And these people are what they call nabi'in. So this is really, we're talking about like a low church sort of situation, or like a Baptist sort of congregations. So we're talking about Arabian type Baptist congregations of monophysite believers, and that's what was going on there. So in the same way that these Baptist congregations today pass ideas around the world, they pass around very quickly amongst them. So sure, they would have taken some ideas from Ethiopia, Armenia, whoever was a monophysite, and on their side they would say, yeah, these guys are kosher, we can accept that. So who is the Nabi in the Quran? Says Falcon Edge. It's very interesting. It carries on directly from Phil Fisanti's question, almost as if he knew the answer already. And the answer is exactly as I just said, The Nabi refers to any leader of the congregation, or not even leader of congregation, but basically any preacher in the local congregations. So it's not a Nabi, it's just to the Nabi of the congregation. So it's not going to be ever possible to identify one Nabi. And they had certain rules which Messianic Hebrews follow concerning marriage. There are certain marriage rules which Nabi, meaning the person who has the gift of the Spirit, and is obviously a teacher of Judaism. Well, clearly, you can't have Nabis who are not teachers of Judaism. You can only be a Nabi if you're a teacher of Judaism in this Messianic Hebrew sort of movement. So, as that's the case, being teachers of Judaism, you have special marriage rules. You're not allowed to just marry anybody you want. You can only marry certain people who are actually also from the teaching sort of caste. It's a caste system, I'm afraid. That is something which is the reality of the situation. It means that if you are from the ministers, then you can only marry somebody from the ministers, or you can marry somebody from the citizens if they voluntarily come and ask you. But you can't actually ask the citizen. So if you're a minister, there's a rule in Judaism. You can't ask the minister. You're a man in the ministry. You can't go to a girl of a citizen who's not in the ministry and say, will you marry me? You can't do that. But if the girl from the citizens comes to the minister and says, will you marry me? Then you're okay. Then you can marry her. But if she doesn't, then you can't. So there are certain rules that apply. And these are called, in Hebrew, if you want to study it, it's called the yuchasin. The yuchasin. Yuchasin. That's the system of marriage and who's allowed to marry who and everything like that. And it's outlined very clearly in the Quran chapter 33, but as long as you understand the Yuchasin first, the Yuchasin system first, then you read chapter 33 and you understand, oh, I know what this is about. Of course, if you haven't got any of the pollution which has come from the Abbasid interpretation of things first, because then otherwise when you read chapter 33, you'll think it's about how a particular prophet can choose whoever he wants to marry, basically, as long as they're from these certain categories. But that's not what it's about, actually. If you're familiar with the Yuchasin system first, then you read chapter 33, you say, oh, I know this is about the Yuchasin system, which incidentally survived in Christianity as the chivalrous system, the system of chivalry. Knights and ladies were only allowed to marry amongst themselves, and they had certain rules. So a knight couldn't take a wife from amongst from women who were not nobles, unless that woman asked him specifically, and if he accepted. So then it would be possible. These rules were designed in place to prevent the noble classes abusing the non-noble classes, you see, because otherwise, if they gave permission to the knights to marry whoever they wanted from amongst the believers, then they could have just gone and taken wives whoever they wanted. So they put the restriction in that the knight cannot ask the non-noble woman to marry him. He has to wait for her to marry him, to ask him to marry, and then they can make that. But if it's from amongst their own caste, then yes, they could get married. So knights and ladies could get married, and they have all this basic system. It's this chivalrous system is exactly also the Yuchasin system, which is described as well in the Quran, and that actually answers one of the questions that was posed to me by I can't remember, but she asked I can't remember the name, but she asked about how do you interpret these passages? You know, they seem to be pretty nasty passages. How do you interpret them? And the answer is, well, from the Judaic perspective, using the Yuchasin system, it has a completely different meaning. So we get a different understanding of those verses. Okay, so Islam, Yaakov asks or says, Islam promotes reverse monophysite Christianity because monophysites never say that Jesus is only human. Wrong, Yaakov. Wrong. You see, this is what you would like to think, wouldn't you? Because you can't understand how is it that all these scholars and academics are saying that Jesus, that the Quran is monophysite. Oh, it must be a reverse monophysite. No, that's not the case at all. It's only because of your understanding of these Quranic verses with the baggage that's been given you by the Muslims already, Abbasid baggage, that you think, well, that must be how it is. That's not the case at all. No, it's actually just exactly classical, what we call Themistian monophysitism. Themistius was a disciple of Severius of Antioch, I think his name is. And this Severian monophysitism was the standard Oriental Orthodox monophysitism for hundreds of years until the 1970s, when they changed their minds or tried to reinterpret Severius. But until that time, it was just the Severian monophysitism that Jesus is purely divine, or that means like the angels, that the angel God is supposed to be infinite light, Ein Sof Or, and the angels are made of light. So therefore, the angels are made of God's essence. In the same way, Jesus was supposed to be a being of light, made of God's essence, so therefore of the same nature of the Father. And that's God from God, light from light. He was light from light. Doesn't say that he was light and human flesh. No, he was just pure light from light. So this is the monophysite view, which is kept in the Quran, you see. And there's a verse about that where it talks about the nur of a lamp, and it's light upon light. This is actually coming a reference to the monophysis of Jesus Christ. So what we see today with this idea that, well, Jesus was purely solely human in nature and not divine in nature at all, is a new innovation which gradually replaced the original beliefs of the Umayyads themselves. So that's not the case. You see, Yaakov, that's not the case. Islam does promote reverse monophysitism, but the Quran itself, the Quranic materials, do not promote reversed monophysite Christianity. They promote the original Severian Themistian monophysite Christology. Okay. So by the way, just so you know, when I say you'd like to think that, this is a sentence from a movie called The Princess Bride. And whenever I see people who've misunderstood something because of a conception which is general, I can't help myself. It's called echolalia. I can't help myself from saying, you'd like to think that, wouldn't you? So I'm sorry, I can't help myself. So I'm not actually attacking you, Yaakov. I'm just quoting The Princess Bride because of echolalia. Sorry about that. Okay, so Yaakov then says, monophysites believe that Jesus had one person and one nature. Divine nature and human nature are one. So Yaakov, I'll explain this. Monophysites believe that Jesus had only one nature, the divine nature, and that this divine nature is the divine, what we can say, is the human aspect of God. God is infinite, has infinite aspects, and one of his aspects is the human aspect of God, so that God has a human aspect. But that human aspect is entirely divine in origin and has only a divine nature to it. It just happens to appear to be human in every single way. It has its own flesh, etc., everything. But it's completely uncreated because it has, in this nature is uncreated because it has come light from light in this way, just like the angels have. So this view makes Jesus into what's called the beginning of all creation, or the archon of all creation. Now, of course, Gnostic Christians believe that the archon is evil, but Gnostic Christians are Satanists. That's the fact. So that's why Gnostic Christianity was always hated and opposed by all the other forms of Christianity, because the archon is exactly the description given in, for example, the book of Relations, the beginning of God's creation, the archon or arche of God's creation. And this direct translation of the words in the Hebrew book of beginnings, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashmaim ve'et haaretz. That's in the Bereshit, in the Reshit, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or in fact, Bereshit is interpreted in the Romaniot Minhag. This is not even Christianity. This is the Romaniot Minhag. Thanks to Philo, for example, Bereshit translated as by archon, God created the heavens and the earth. By archon, God created the heavens and the earth. By the beginning, or by the beginning, Reshit, God created the heavens and the earth. That means by the beginning of God's creation, God created the heavens and the earth. So the first, what you can say, the prototokos, again, it's another Romaniot word. The prototokos, or the archon, that's the firstborn of creation. If the firstborn, I suppose, of God's creation, the beginning of all God's creation, is this the word which through whom all things were made, and that is light from light. So so it's the beginning of time. There never was a time which did not exist, because it is time. It's synonymous with time. Without it, there is no time. So there never was a time when it didn't exist. So it came. It's light, which was in a sense created, the firstborn, the beginning of the creation, and then through this all things were made. So this is a very Jewish form of view of things. It's also there, as you can see, in all the Christian scriptures. It's written all down in the Creed, for example, and in the Book of Revelations. It's all there. It's just a very Jewish way of looking at things. So they believe that this Reshit, this beginning of God's creation, this Archon, is of purely divine nature, but it is the human aspect, and it visited. Well, it walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. It visited Abraham. Abraham gave it some. It appeared as three a triad or a trinity to Abraham, and he gave it milk or yogurt and then some meat to eat. And it appeared again to Moses and to all various people throughout history. And every time it appears in the flesh, in its own flesh, not in our low level sort of flesh that humans are, but in its own flesh. I talked about the intensity of God's presence in one of my videos on Jewish panentheism, which is the theology of Judaism, which is the theology that the Bible was written in. So you need to study it, otherwise you won't understand the Bible. That there is an intensity of presence in the Archon, in the Reshit, in the beginning of God's creation, the Prototokos, which is not there in you and I. You and I do not have this intensity of presence. So to say that God, say, formed Jesus out of our matter from Mary's womb, is to say he was devoid of the intensity of presence that the Archon has, and there's no need for the Archon to take flesh from Mary's body to be present with us here, because that is his nature. That he is the aspect which can be present in creation. So in fact, what he did is he set aside some of the intensity of the presence to walk amongst us and not be noticed, so that we wouldn't all automatically fall down and worship and bow down before him. Because if he didn't set aside that intensity, so much intensity, then we would be forced. We wouldn't be able to stop ourselves from bowing down and worshiping him as soon as we saw him. So he set aside some of that to be able to walk amongst us and be unnoticed. So it's literally like he disguised himself in order to be present amongst us. But he didn't have to take on a human disguise to do that. God is able to do all things and isn't limited that he has to sort of, I have to disguise the Archon in some human flesh. I'll take it from Mary. God can just do that. Click fingers, it's done. No effort required. So that's I hope the answer to the nature question which Yakov raised here. T. Zamrik asked, in 610, probably there was a celestial phenomenon where Mars appears to come out of the moon. Thus, the splitting of the moon miracle idea was born. In 622, probably the Battle of the Car happened. Yes, that's right. But T. Zamrik says, in 610, probably there was a celestial phenomenon. It's not probably, T. Zamrik. It's a fact, and you can use any retrocalculation software to which will give you a model of the night sky. Just choose the location of Kufa on that software, look towards the west, and rewind the time, on the software. Rewind it all the way to the 610 March, and then you'll suddenly see that that's exactly what happens. So with the new moon, so it's not a probable thing; it's an factual thing. In 610, that actually happened. It's a real thing that actually happened, and that was discovered. Well, I suggested that was something like that was happening. I asked a friend called Faye to do some research, because I didn't have the software when I was stuck in Israel for a while and in quarantine. And I asked her if she would go through the software to do that, and she very diligently went through every year to try and find from, I think, 610 or 605, something like that, until 622 or something like that. And she found this event happened. I asked her to check from Kufa. She found this event happened in March in 610, following the instructions that I had given her. So that little video, which you might have seen on the as part of the presentation I did for Jay today, was actually filmed by Faye. She filmed that from her software, which was incorporated into the video, which we put up on Jay's channel last night. There's some things that have been edited out of that to save time, but basically that's where it comes from. Okay, so that's enough of that. And Yaakov agrees with Tizamrik. And then Yaakov says in 62 AD, the Battle of Vikar happens and Arabs for the first time gain independence from Persia under the rule of Hani ibn Qabisa. That's exactly what happens. Hani, don't forget, is then very quickly replaced by Hanzala, who is much braver, and he's a poet. Hanzala is a poet. That's a very important thing, okay? Because Hanzala was able to inspire the people during the battle with his poetry. So then Yaakov says, so the Islamic calendar started in 62 AD, the case of Ibn Qabisa mentioned, yes. And that's probably the same Ibn Qabisa, it's probably the Ibn Abi Qabsha mentioned by Abu Sufyan in some hadiths, when he says the case of Ibn Abi Qabsha has become noticed by Heraclius. So he's probably talking about this Hani ibn Qabisa. Not obviously not Iyas ibn Qabisa, because Iyas is on the wrong side. He's the enemy of the Free Arab state, and he's exactly who the Free Arabs are fighting against. So not Iyas. The idea that it was Iyas comes from, just so you know, it comes from something called A.J. Deuce. I have been told, and I can't understand why A.J. Deuce would have made such a gross error. It's very clear, I guess, that he has his own agenda and he's trying to push his own ideas forward. And he thought that was what made most sense, because he maybe has. I understand they call he called Iyas Elijah. So the idea that Iyas means Elijah also comes from A.J. Deuce. This is A.J. Deuce's idea. And I guess it's because they're talking about a prophet, so he's thinking, well, Elijah the prophet, so let's say Iyas is Elijah the prophet, because the prophet comes before the Messiah. So I guess that's why he chose Iyas, just because the name looks a little bit similar to Elijah, which I think is really very, very sloppy, to be honest. I think that's really trying to force things to fit rather than letting. I mean, I would love to try and force things to fit my agenda, but rather than doing that, I think once you start to do that, you become mad. It's the route to insanity to do that. You should try and find independent corroboration for your ideas. You have to find other people who've got the same thing, and really you have to look for the sources. So I guess that A.J. Deuce was completely unaware of the Chinese source, which basically corroborates the story of that Tabari gives, the backstory of the car. And he must have been unaware of that, because if he was aware of that, he would realize that he can't choose Iyas. Or if he was aware of it, then he's just dismissing it, and then that's as bad as dismissing evidence, isn't it? You shouldn't dismiss evidence. So whatever his reasons were, I don't know. Then he made that idea that Iyas ibn Qabisa is Elijah, and that this is somehow related to the forerunner of Muhammad or Muhammad himself. And there's just no basis to it. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I feel embarrassed that I supported it. I didn't realize that this was A.J. Deuce's idea. I thought that Mel had come up with this idea, but then I realized later that actually it all came from A.J. Deuce. Somebody brought that to my attention and sent me an email, and I realized, yeah, the whole thing falls flat. They also sent me that person wants to remain anonymous, but they sent me the whole passage from Tabari, and pointed out that the person who is corresponding to the one who inherits the armory is not Iyas. That the page where which has been presented, which looks like Iyas is the one who's getting the armory, is immediately after the page where it actually says exactly who really inherited the armory, and that person was Hani. So it's like a bit of sleight of hand was presented with hiding hiding the source or hiding exactly the paragraph before, just to present the second paragraph where it looks like Iyas is getting an armory, but actually in the previous paragraph it says very clearly, explicitly, that it was Hani ibn Qabisa who was the one who inherited the armory from Nu'man. So that was a bit of an embarrassment, but never mind, we've moved on from there. So we all know that it's Hani who was the inheritor, not Iyas. Iyas was the enemy. So the Islamic calendar started in 62. There we go. So now T. Zamanik says, actually the crescent and the star that appear on the Arab Sasanian coins could be related to the celestial phenomenon. Imagine how that logo is still used on many flags today, such as the Turkish flag. Well, yes, it's not based on the 610, because of course the Sasanians used this symbol for many, many years. But it could be a special symbol for the Sasanians themselves, that whenever they saw this, it was something that the Sasanians thought, that's our omen, that's our family omen, that's our family omen. Like in saying that Constantine is supposed to have this omen where he says he saw this sign in the sky, and it said he heard this voice saying, in this sign conquer. Maybe the Sasanians also had a family omen which they passed on and said, yes, this is our sign. Whenever we see this sign, we're going to be fine. So it could be that they were waiting for that sign to come along. And they, when they saw that sign, they said, that's our family sign. It's a good omen for us. So it could be. And that's probably also the Quraysh Abbasids had the same sign. So Fisanti says, also, what do you think of the hypothesis put forward by the brother Katz that Salman the Persian was Shulam ben Hushiel? Salman the Persian was Shulam ben Hushiel. I don't know who Brother Katz is. So Salman the Persian was Shulam ben Hushiel. Shulam ben Hushiel. I think that's Ben Abrahamson is the one who suggested that Shulam ben Hushiel is Salman the Persian. If I remember the names, the only time I've come across this name is Shulam ben Hushiel. I think that's Ben Abrahamson who came up with that idea, not Katz. I don't know. I guess you're talking about some Rabbi Katz. I don't know Rabbi Katz. But I know Rabbi Ben Abrahamson, and he came up with that name. I don't know. Ben Hushiel was is a real person. I'm not sure. I haven't come across that name myself. That's something which Ben Abrahamson himself has researched, and I'm not familiar with it. So can't comment until I see the original source on that. Sorry. All I can say is that Ben Abrahamson suggested that, and that's what he believes, as far as I understand it even today. So Yaakov says, do you have any source where to check the 610 AD celestial event, like a web page or software or something? Yes, well, I don't have it, but you can download any form of sort of sky watching software for studying astronomy or even astrology, and it should be able to give you some kind of models of the night sky. So as long as you can choose the location, then you can get that. I think probably the best person to speak to with regards to that software would be probably Faye. So if she's around and you see her, just ask her which software did you use, and then she can tell you which one she used. So actually, I think Samrik's going to help you out on that. Yakov Matjasu says, Murad said that Salman Persian was the reason why Arabs conquered Sasanian Empire. I don't know. I don't think. I think there are many reasons. There are many reasons. I mean, it's Persia. It's a very, very rich place. So I don't think there would just be because they had somebody had some relatives there. I don't know. I think there are many reasons why. Okay, Fisanti says, now a comment regarding the talk technically. The Umayyads survived in Al-Andalus, so maybe there could be some documents untouched by the Abbasids there. Sadly, no. There are people who are supposed to be written books and ideas in Al-Andalus during the times of the Umayyads, but they were part of a movement which actually eventually took control of the country after and declared loyalty to the Abbasid Caliphate. So sadly, as soon as they declare loyalty to the Abbasids, then we can't use it anymore. So that's the problem there. So certainly no, there's nothing there. They have some people who are supposed to be there before the Abbasids, but they were loyal to the Abbasids, and eventually that area declared loyalty to the Abbasids. So certainly it doesn't work. There's literally nothing, unless we manage to dig up some original artifact in Andalusia. But otherwise, no, we don't. So My Home says, good job on your presentation with Jay. Thank you so much, My Home. There's only part 1. There's parts 2, 3, and even 4 coming up. Sojourn On says, hi, folks. Sorry I'm late. I will have to listen from the beginning. No problem. Go ahead, Sojourn. Interesting topic. And Sin, Standard Islamic Narrative, yes, which was actually coined by me, remember, back in September, if you start looking through the videos, Sneakers Corner. But I don't use this anymore because it seems a bit rude to say sin. I prefer to say Standard Abbasid Narrative instead. But as soon as I move on, people tend to catch up with me where I've already moved on, and they're sort of just slowly getting on to the page where I was on in the past. So maybe they will catch up. Anyway, it's all just a matter of time. But that's what happens. I've been studying since the 1990s, you know. The only other person who's been doing that is Jay, but he was focused on a different approach for a very long time. It was a completely different approach from me. But you're not going to find many people who've been doing it since that time. And if you do, we're all going to be on the same page where we understand that the Quran is a monophysite, Severian monophysite text. Okay, so Yaakov says Quraysh may be the Bakr tribe. No, I don't think the Quraysh has got anything to do with the Bakr tribe. I don't think so. I don't see any reason to believe that yet, because think about it this way. This is Yaakov's suggestion here. Yaakov, if you think about it this way, if the Quraysh, the Abbasids were definitely Quraysh. They claim to be Quraysh. They all like to talk about the Quraysh all the time. If the Bakr tribe was also Quraysh, why didn't the Abbasids include the Bakr tribe in their genealogy? You see, they didn't. They only included the Umayyads because they couldn't avoid the fact that the Umayyads had already become very well known as being related to this Muhammad. But the Abbasids only had to deal with that, so they did. But since the Bakr tribe was never related or never suggested as being related to the Quraysh, the Abbasids didn't have to bother about that. The Abbasids only dealt with things that they had to deal with, and they weren't bothered about things that they didn't have to deal with. So there's the reason why Quraysh is not the Bakr tribe. Falconage says, you should connect with Robert Spencer. Well, the person who could connect us is Jay. So, well, I'll mention it to Jay next. If I remember, I can never remember all the things I've got to mention. People suggest you have to mention this. If I remember, next time I speak with Jay, then I'll mention it. Eric Creek says, hi. Oos says, when is part 2 of Jay? Well, I guess it may be tomorrow. I imagine he releases one every day or every 2 days. So keep your eyes peeled. Part 2 is all about Omar, and it's about 49 minutes long. So it's get your cup of tea before you start watching it, because it's a long slog. But but it is interesting at the end. And even that, I still cut out tons. Even that. Because you can't, you have to try and make things on other channels. You want to make everything into a sort of 20 or 30-minute video max, so that people have retention. A lot of people's attention span is not very long, and they can't pay attention for a very long time, so they move on. So the idea is to try and release these as quickly and succinctly as possible. But the story of Omar / Muhammad is difficult to do succinctly. So I really crammed as much as I could in a very short amount of time, cutting out all sorts of facts, and it's still 49 minutes. So, but I think that's coming out tomorrow. So look forward to that. And of course, if you miss it, you can subscribe here and you'll watch it soon, because about a week later, I'll upload it on my channel, just to give the courtesy to Jay first, for him having it on his channel first. Okay, the car, says Eric the Great, probably happened in 622. I agree, simultaneously with Heraclius' offensive into Persia. It makes sense, doesn't it? Eric the Great suggests that it was a simultaneous with Heraclius' offense into Persia. It makes perfect sense that the Battle of the Car would have been part of a coordinated effort of war against the Persians, I would think. Okay. Then we have another comment. 618 years, probably the founding of the Arab state. I don't know. I don't know if we can be precise. But whichever year it was founded, that's where it comes from. So, and he says also in 620, if the original year of the Arabs was 618. And then he says, Eric the Great says, we need to subtract 4 to 5 years from the Abbasid calendar. I don't know how we can arrange that. I don't know how it can be worked out. There's probably some expert there who can work out why there is a discrepancy of 4 to 5 years in some of the sources, and we have to listen to that person, whoever they are. I had an email from somebody once who said they were going to do a presentation on that on Mel's channel, but I don't remember ever seeing that ever coming out, and I don't know if that person is still around. Anyway, so Explosive X says, I have just finished your video with Jay and came here to subscribe. Thank you, Explosive X. God bless you abundantly. Ali Musawi says, Abbasid and can't read it, and Uyma, also Iraq and Syria country, both of them was Persia states long years ago. Eric the Great says, where can I get more info on Hanzala? Never heard of him. You have to read Tabari. I'll tell you what. If you go to my Patreon, I've got some things uploaded on Patreon for my patrons, and I'll upload it there so you can download the passages there. It's because my patrons, of course, deserve some special treatment. So I said I only have a few of them. So, if anybody's still there listening to me, please do go and support me on Patreon, because since the 1990s until now, I've not been paid to do this research. It's all by myself. I'm funded by myself from various jobs, and nobody's ever funded me to do this. So it would be nice if anybody feels like what I've brought forward is worth something. Just like if you want to give a small donation to say thank you, then I would very much appreciate it, and I'll do my best to upload some things on Patreon for you all. So then we have Fisanti says it is in the Khuzestan Chronicle, King Mundhir III, 504 to 554, who was called the Warrior and was the 6th in the line of the Ishmaelite kings. Thank you for that, the Khuzestan Chronicle. H.N. says, did the Umayyads remaining in Al-Andalus follow the Abbasid agenda? Eventually, yes. When they acknowledged the Abbasid Caliph, it's pretty clear that they would have done that under certain conditions. The Abbasids would have had some requirements. The Umayyads would have been saying no, and eventually along would have come some Umayyad who would have said, okay, we'll do that, and they acknowledged the Abbasids as the Caliph. So yes, sadly, that's how it worked. But for a while, probably not. So Gabriel Bueno says, Shalom from Brazil. Shalom. Thank you for coming to my channel, Gabriel. God bless you. I love your name. And Shalom from India, says Yakov. Ali Musawi says, Khuzestan and Shorestan and Syria, I think that's Khuzestan and Khorasan, maybe, and Syria belonged to Persian country and to talk Aramaic language, such as Baka Maka means one in the world. That means one in the world too. Well, Makkah means smitten in Hebrew, or accursed. It can refer to a desert land, for example. But I think that I have an Iraqi friend who told me that this is probably, Batin Makkah is actually probably one word. And we're all wrong when we're reading that verse in the Quran, which is talking about Batin Makkah, by trying to imagine it means Makkah, and it shouldn't be read as Makkah. It should actually be read as Batin Makkah, which is actually the name of the place, which would mean a valley, a river valley somewhere. So I am inclined to believe him and agree with him. And remember that this Batin Makkah has got absolutely nothing to do with anything else. It's got nothing to do with Hajj. It's got nothing to do with Qibla. It's got nothing to do with anything. And remember that Al Masjid Al Haram in the Messianic Hebrew interpretation of the Quran would be any local church-like area, masjid, where they would do what's called the Hitviyat ceremony. So even when it says, oh no, because Mecca in the Batin Makkah in this verse in the Quran is saying that they were being prevented from doing something with the Masjid al-Haram, you can say yes, but that could very simply refer to the local church there was being threatened by some people. The local church in Batin Makkah could be threatened by some people, and it could have been an important event in the early days. But it doesn't mean that it's got anything to do with the Temple Mount or anything in Jerusalem. Now, yes, the pilgrimage is to Jerusalem. That you could do a pilgrimage to any sort of church center, because it's not a if you have something which is a command or a law in Judaism, in Messianic Hebrews take it all symbolically. So everything can be done with your local sort of community. You don't have to spend all of your money to go on a trip thousands of miles away to satisfy God. You don't have to do that. But if you were going to go to do a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, then you should visit the Kaaba, the cube. That's the holy cube that Sophronis refers to, the tomb of Jesus. And that Kaaba has got nothing to do with any of the other masjids of Al-Haram, of the Eucharist. So it's got nothing to do with it. And the one in Mecca also got nothing to do with it. That's Batin Mecca, which I've suggested is in the Khabur River Valley. And the fact that all of the synagogues are facing towards the Temple Mount of the Holy Land, the synagogues of the Arabs, that's to be expected. They were Sadducee synagogues. And only after the Sadducees were converting to become Messianic Hebrews, then we start to see that their masjids start to face in other directions. And this is really only after I think the first masjid to start facing a different direction is the Wasit Masjid. Until then, all the masjids are facing Jerusalem because they're all synagogues. But they would have, it was basically, I suppose, Abdul Malik is enforcing the idea that you don't have to face towards the Temple Mount. And also Abdul Malik's, everybody says that Abdul Malik's temple, there's inscriptions around the temple, the Dome of the Rock, and the Temple Mount are as a big sign towards Christians. I doubt that, because Christians wouldn't have gone up there and they wouldn't have gone to explore the rock. I think that these inscriptions were specifically around that as a kind of a sort of in-your-face sort of declaration from the Messianic Hebrews to those Hebrews who are not Messianic, saying, in your face, we control the rock, and every inscription around the rock is about Jesus, whether we're using the word Muhammad for him or not. But we also put Moses mentioned there because we are Messianic Hebrews. So it's like basically sort of the insult is there. It is a declaration. It's a big sort of little birdie flick to somebody, but it's not to the Christians. It's a monophysite Christology, and that's understood by monophysites. It's not really bothering the diaphysites that much because they don't go up there to have a look. But if there's anybody who wanted to go up to have a look and see, who was actually from a non-Messianic Jewish background, then they would have suddenly also seen all the inscriptions saying Jesus, 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 and they would have probably that's basically it's like saying, yes, you're welcome to come and explore this rock, but don't forget that it's Messianics who are in charge. So it's a little bit rude, and that's basically what was being done, I think. So Jay's kind of right, but also wrong in who this insult was directed towards. It wasn't directed towards Christians. That's what I think. So Logic asks, Joe, what do you think about Marwan bin al-Hakam to be the historical Muhammad? Well, I don't believe that's Marwan. You mean the father of Abdul Malik? I don't think that's. I don't think there's any basis to this. No Logic. I think you need to watch my video, which has been released on Jay's channel, Logic, and then you'll see what I think the historical Muhammad was. I don't think Marwan is that person. I don't see any reason why. If you have a reason to suggest why, then Logic, post it in the comments underneath, and I'll be happy to read. But unless, I mean, my view is, of course, from a Messianic Hebrew point of view, unless it's got a Messianic Hebrew background. I think Marwan may actually refer to Maronites, Maron. So it's got something to do with Maronites, I think. Maronite Christian background to Abdul Malik there. And Guru Bishop Rabbi Mullah the First says, I think Islam is made so you get the truth by rejecting it. That is that people take it as truth because they don't want to see and lay back. That's pretty complicated. I'll have to reflect on that over a cup of tea, but not right now. Nathaniel says inconceivable. Yakov says, so no problem. Read Marwan. Logic says Marwan has got married of Yazid's widow, and says Ziad Gde Water H. I don't understand that. Well, you make comments about that. And then Guru says Germans are the real Jews. And then Yakov Mashmati says Guru Kaha Seho. I guess this is not English. Silver says, Joe, you give our creator so much glory. Thank you, Silver. I try. And then Guru says, we needed laws. And Falconage says something, I can't, it's not relevant, I think. Old Testament laws, Jesus to get over our shame, and Islam to get over the truth by seeing the faults and be honest to ourselves. I see what you're saying. You're saying that the reason why God allowed Islam to exist is so that we can start training our brains, possibly. And those who fail the test are those who just swallow the Abbasid story wholeheartedly without question, and those who pass the test are those who look into it and find the sources and the origins of it. I agree. Yeah, so it's about trying to use your brain. I agree with you on that. And so thank you, Guru, for your comments. Philip Zaki says, Elias does mean Elijah in common Arabic speaking knowledge. Well, I don't know. Yes. Yes. I don't know. You'll have to give me a source to prove that. I'm not going to accept it without a source. Just I heard too many things, getting very doubting. I'm doubting it very much, Philip Zaki. So I'd like a written source. So Yakov Masidyatu's got another comment there. They're having a chat away. Just leaving the chat together. I can't understand. I don't know. Are they speaking Gujarati or Hindi or whatever? I'm not sure. Try to keep your comments in English. And I think Guru asked me, do you know Rabbi Braitovich? No, I don't know. So Silver says 21 likes, thanks for watching. Thank you. Right. That's a very good point. Silver says if you're one of those 27 who are watching and you haven't liked, then just click like. This doesn't take you long to just click like, does it? Let's see if I can get to a key point of anything interesting here. Please give the link for the software. The people are asking for the software. Umayyads, were the Umayyads neo-Messianic Jews? We won't call them Messianic Jews. Jew is a very confusing word. Red Wolf asks this question because most people think that the word Jew has got something to do with Judah, the tribe of Judah. So to be very explicit and clear, we don't call ourselves Jews. We call ourselves Hebrews, especially, for example, I'm not from the tribe of Judah, so why should I call myself Jew? In English, it confuses the matter. But in fact, in Hebrew, we have this word Yehudi, which is more explicit, and it doesn't mean from the tribe of Judah. It means somebody who practices Yahudut, which is from the root Hoda'ah, which means thanksgiving. So it means a grateful person is a Yehudi. So in Hebrew, I'm a Yehudi, but in English, I'm not a Jew. I'm a Hebrew, and we'll leave it at that. So the Umayyads were not neo-Messianic Jews, because neo would mean these days. Umayyads would have been just Messianic Hebrews. That's the argument there, Red Wolf. I hope that explains things. Us says Patreon. Yes, Patreon. I will put a link to Patreon. It's easy. Patreon.com/Red Judaism. If you want to go and sponsor me, please do. I'll welcome it. Thank you, Silver. That's very kind of you to put that up there. Okay, very good. I think I answered all your questions, and probably you've all gone up to have your rests, cups of tea, whatever. So I'm going to end this now before another question comes. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Take care, and we'll speak again soon. Bye-bye.